All right. Morning, good morning, good morning. So, anybody sore or stuffed with pizza and donuts? I don't know. One of the two. Yeah, tired. Their air conditioning was really nice. Talked about Lisa and Jerry's movie yesterday. All right, so let's have a prayer before we get started. Father, thank you for the blessing of your word, and thank you for the blessing of this day to be able to take a look at your word, Father, that we even have it, and that you have cared so much about us, that you've given us a record down through the ages, the thousands of years that we've been in existence, that you are the creator, that you're the only true, the only living God. Thank you for showing us on top of that how much you care for us. But help us as we're looking at your word here this morning to be able to see you, to be able to change our lives, shift our lives according to what we see. We pray this through Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, I was looking at a little bit of like the manuscripts for Daniel, and there's a manuscript, a partial manuscript of Daniel back to 50 BC. So that was it was in one of the probably not going to say this right, the Qumran caves. One of the manuscripts that was those were the ones that some of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in there. So pretty far back before Jesus. So we're at a pivotal point in Daniel. This is we've got not just a regime change, but a whole empire change. Right at the end of the last chapter, the Babylon got taken over by the Medes and the Persians, and the king at the time, Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son, got killed. So he's gone. The whole city's gone. The city of Babylon's been sacked, right? So what was the prophecy about what would happen to Babylon? Anybody remember? I think we kind of talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Are you going to? Anybody remember that basically it's going to be a desolation? Only the jackals or hyenas or whatever are gonna live there. One of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and that's how it ends up. So and we don't know what kind of a time difference is between the two of these, but we could maybe get some type of a clue when we dive into this. So we had our three questions that we've been asking. Oh, yes, Amos. We are in Daniel chapter 6. Sorry. Yeah. We just finished chapter 5. And in chapter 5, that was the whole thing with the writing on the wall and ended up with the destruction of Babylon. And I'll leave it, I won't go over it, but I think we kind of talked about each one of them. We look at our questions, what does this account say about Daniel's character? There's not a lot in there about that. And what does the account say about Belshazzar's character? We talked about that. And what is God doing in this account? Well, he's moving from the head of the golden statue to the silver chest and arms of the golden statue. Bob?
I think that one of the lessons we learned was that the stewardship shown by the rulers of Babylon is that they were partying while their country was in ruins, and they just weren't paying attention. And it has to do with stewardship. They were stewards of the empire who weren't following their stewardship. They were trusting in their armies and their system of government to just flow right along while they made stupid decisions. And it reminds me that we have a stewardship as well to teach the gospel, preach the gospel, live lives that are exemplary, showing that we serve Christ. This is how Christians live. And we have something that others may possibly want and should want. But we can't neglect our stewardship by letting our gaze drift away from what we're supposed to be doing. And Belshazzar did that.
Yeah, and he just added T and Belteshazzar, and he did the opposite. Right? He's consistent. And
talking about stewardship, it sounds like a country which we live in right now. But it's interesting to think about Belshazzar, right? Butcher that, but whatever, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
He's dead, we're not. It's interesting because, Bob mentioned it. He kind of had this aloof attitude or a prideful manner. Well, I got this kingdom from my father, so yes, naturally it's going to be a strong kingdom. But he wasn't a good steward to where he understood the government. And I think that's where, like Bob mentioned, he fell off. Obviously, he wasn't a follower of God either, which was a big portion of that. But when he saw that hand and he had no idea what was going on, only then did he look for someone who could understand it, and that's when he found Daniel. So to see Daniel come into this area and tell him what it all meant, it kind of humbled him. Did it change him? We don't know. It doesn't really say that much. But we do know that he was slain shortly after. So we know that.
and he knew that he had been weighed in the balances and found wanting. So, okay, any other comments on that before we start in the next chapter? Okay, so now Babylon's gone. We're in the empire of the Medes and the Persians, and we have Darius. We've got good King Darius. Let's read the first 5 verses, I think. And like I said, the context is the Babylonian Empire has fallen. Nebuchadnezzar's son has been executed. The city of Babylon has been sacked. So as we read through these sections, let's try to answer our 3 questions. What is God doing in this account? I'm going to move that up to the top, because I think that's probably the most important. What does this account say about Daniel's character? And what does this account say about Darius's character? Those are our big players now. Verses 1 through 5, Daniel's ascent and the political fallout of that. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, the governors, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and the satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. But the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." Okay, so that's the first. Let's talk about first, what is God doing? Well, there's kind of an elephant in the room though, right? Because there's something that happened here that doesn't, to my knowledge, doesn't usually happen whenever one world empire takes over another world empire. Usually when you come in and you sack Babylon, what do? You kill all the leaders or enslave them. And what did happen to Daniel? Well, he survived. Well, so God's doing something. God's doing a thing because he not only made it through and he's not a slave, but he ends up on top. He ends up on top of the heap. Bob.
So God did show justice.
I'll just sit here, what about that?
So God did show justice, and he didn't wipe out all of the rulers of Babylon, all of them. But Daniel wasn't there. Daniel had gone back to wherever he was residing. And so Daniel wasn't part of those in that room that all were laid waste. So God had set him up in a good way.
In a good way, yeah.
To be an influence, a continuing influence for his people and his plan.
Excellent. Other thoughts on these? Jim?
Well, I have a note that says that Daniel was, this is actually from verse 10, but it says Daniel was past 80 years of age at this time, yet he was still on his knees, thanking God and asking for his guidance and help. If I got on my knees, I'm afraid I'd be there for a while.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I haven't, studied or found out, if that's, in here or someplace, but some time has gone past. So that, him rising up to the part where he's in Darius's eyes, he's gonna put him over everyone else. All the governors, all the satraps of the empire. And Daniel's got to be on top. And how long does that take? That's got to take a while. So there's a substantial time frame.
So if we look at our timeline, we know that between 609 and 607, Daniel was taken to Babylon. This is now sometime between 539 and 536. It's been a long time.
Okay, so by the date of the sacking of Babylon. Got it. Perfect. Other thoughts on these 5 verses? What does it say about Daniel's character? What does this show us about Daniel's character? I know what I think. You guys, I know all have thoughts, and I'd love your thoughts. Because they're not mine. And that's what we're doing this for, right? Amos.
Well, to me, it sounds like if he set him above these satraps, but he started to, as it were, shine above the other governors, then it seems to me that he had a strong will to serve, but he also had a humble attitude, because later on in the verses, it will show that he was still getting on his knees, praying to God in the window. And that's his quote unquote downfall by the other satraps.
His weakness, right?
So he was still willing to put God first, no matter what. And then he put his new kingdom, his country, where he lived and resides, Babylon, second. So he prioritized God first, and that's how we all should be. We should all look to Daniel as, we should look to many people in the Bible for examples of how we should live. But to see this man who was once Jewish, still is Jewish, Hebrew, get taken from his kingdom, become a slave, then rise above all these other slaves to become the king's personal assistant, to become a governor of the Mede Empire. It shows that no matter what he did, he was still willing to learn something new. But first and foremost, prioritize God. So he had a humble attitude. He was willing to serve.
Excellent. Cindy?
I see that Daniel was blameless because the satraps didn't find anything against him. And that they knew enough about Daniel that they could catch him in something that had to do with Daniel's God that might contradict what the national belief was. Which is an example to us is that we should also be blameless. That if anybody's going to find anything in fault in us, it should have to do with our God.
Excellent. And they had all this opportunity to find out, right? There, during his rise to power, it's political, right? And this wasn't, I don't think this was a new thing. They just didn't decide this. That's going on as you're going up and up and up. Richard?
Well, yeah, to everybody's point, that's what's so impressive. If you go back to when he was first in captivity, of not wanting the delicacies and not being involved. And if you look at his character, he's always put God first. And if you think about just all the opulence and everything that he's surrounded by and just the power that he's given, you see the examples of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, and they get prideful and they get power and they just, hey, look at me. But you never hear of Daniel doing that. He's always humble, always praising God, thanks God. He never, his first response is keep your gifts. They give them to him anyway, but keep your gifts. And that just kind of tells me to Cindy's point of like, that's the example is, to live that godly life and, set yourself aside from all of those things. And then to your earlier point is I think this is probably one of the first times we see it where the Persians, where they set up, but you'll see it with Alexander the Great does it, where they come in, they'll conquest, but they won't sack it, they won't kill everybody, they'll just occupy. And then the Romans as well. So I think you're seeing a new, how conquest is taken, and it's not going to obliterate. They kind of set the empire.
Yeah, the Persians definitely did that. They would go in and just get tribute, right, and not take over. And then if you didn't tribute, then they would sack you. Yeah, and that isn't it. And we kind of talked about this in one of the earlier lessons. Somebody brought up the point of everybody was bowing down to the golden image, right? Well, who wasn't there? Daniel. He had this ability to not be in those places. He wasn't at the feast, right? Where the probably because he's not invited, but he just had the ability to not be at those places where he shouldn't be, and he was never there. And they always had to call him, and he's off, doing something else, praying or focusing on what he needed to be focusing on instead of they're rubbing shoulders with the elite. Other thoughts on this section? Real quick, what does the account say about Darius's character? So we need to be tracking this now as we're going through the rest of the book. Jim.
Well, it says a couple of things about Darius. As we mentioned it earlier, he didn't just go through and wipe out all the leaders. Instead he said, okay, I'm going to get this organized. So he was sort of an organizer, not just strict leader. But he also, when they came to him and said that Daniel was praying, which breaking his decree, he could have just said, well, then somebody ought to go out and kill him. But he said, no, I'm going to let him come to me and just see what this is all about. So he was at least thoughtful about things. He didn't just make hasty decisions.
So, yeah, so let's move to these next few verses where it talks about it and see it more, even in more detail, about that. Now, before we move on to that, I just want to make sure I have all my thoughts together on these. So Daniel rising to the kingdom sets off a political struggle, right, as we were looking at it. They couldn't fight any charges, and they were looking for him. And he was faithful to God and faithful to the empire, faithful to the emperor as well. And his only possible weakness was his obedience to God's laws. And which is interesting that they knew that. That's not something that he had hidden. So it's out there. Daniel has always been open with it, and we're seeing it still.
I find it interesting that the old governors, now the new governors, the ones who went looking at accused Daniel, they have the same problem that has plagued man from the beginning. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, the pride of life. And it just continues as we go on. It just keeps going. And it's one of those verses we need to pay very close attention to because it's seductive and it's a trap. A trap that Daniel never fell into because he's faithful.
Yeah,
But
great example.
so they had the old people had it, the new people had it. We're going to see the people after them had it. And, we need to be wary of that we don't fall into that trap as well.
Yeah, he's a great example of what to be like, right? Yeah. And so two things before we look. Darius's character, the fact that he saw Daniel and probably knew about Daniel's belief in God. Did Darius know about what had happened with Nebuchadnezzar and all that? We don't know, but probably he did. And he goes ahead and he trusts in Daniel so much that he's willing to make him to be second in the empire. Now, the one thing that I just wanted to point out real quick is the phrase that's used, and I don't know what some of the other versions. In verse 3, Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. Whatever that means, whether that's voluntary or that's God, we don't know, or probably a combination of both, I would think. Right. So that's what we're seeing in Daniel's characters and how he's consistent over maybe 80 some odd years and what he's seen. All right, now let's read through verses 6 through 11, the witch hunt. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king, and thus said to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom and the administrators and the satraps and the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O God, or you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. All right, so what do we see here? What are your thoughts of this? There is so much here. What do we see about Darius? What do we see about Daniel? What do we see about the other perpetrators? Amos.
Well, we kind of see that, like, they wrote this law so that they could get specifically Daniel. Now, King Darius probably saw it as something like, oh, they just want to petition me for a certain thing or this and that. So he thought of it as more of like maybe a agricultural law or something like that, something where people come to him to ask or request certain things. He never gave it thought that they were specifically doing it Daniel.
Yeah.
So he was a little ignorant as to what their cause was.
Yeah.
So he had no idea that they had ulterior motives for this law. And it's kind of like laws that we make today, where it's like there's 10,000 page laws, and we're like, what's in this? And there's all sorts of stuff there, but that's besides the point.
Yeah, 30 days, you know, that's not a big deal.
So he was looking at it, he's like, okay, so no big deal, this is gonna be an easy law.
And any other gods, small g, right?
Exactly.
You know, so it's really carefully worded. Yeah. Jim?
It says that it would be, gives the impression it would only be good for 30 days, which means it was specifically to get Daniel in or away.
Just
It was such a great
enough
idea.
to spring the trap.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So,
Other thoughts on this? Bob?
So I kind of got the impression that he wasn't paying attention.
I don't think he was.
He just signed it, said it on whatever what it was,
Yeah, and this next section we're gonna see, is gonna bear that out.
what is putting your trust in man, not in God. Trusting in those who are faithful, those who are demonstrated as not being faithful, and a ruler who hasn't got a clue what's going on by his trusted advisors, his governors. He's not paying attention.
He's not seeing what the, kind of the political landscape is, right?
But we can also say he was a little arrogant, because he was thinking, oh, they have to come to me for everything, they're not gonna go to their God, they're not gonna go to another man for their petition, they have to come to me. So that's a little arrogant on his part.
So they're definitely playing on that, aren't they? Yeah, yeah. And they had to, you know, because all the emperors had that. Right, they had the ego. But something I thought about, if you to compare what he's doing, compare him to Nebuchadnezzar. You know, Darius never does anything like the golden image, does it? As far as we know, from what we're told, he doesn't do it, you know, have everybody from all around, you know, has to come and bow down before this gold image whenever the orchestra plays and the big fanfare. And that emperor worship, then it's like to the nth degree. Nebuchadnezzar did that in his early days. We see that he changed. But Darius isn't like that, right? He hasn't done anything, but he's still susceptible to the Richard has his hand up. To the well, yeah, everyone needs to be, petitioning me, not anybody else.
Well, he's kind of carrying on a consistent theme. Whether they're children of God or they're secular, it's a consistent theme throughout history and throughout Scripture that it's arrogance, it's pride, and one thinking that I can accomplish this and I did this when you remove God from the equation. And it happens time and time and time again. And, I look at it, because sometimes you look back and go, oh, he's an emperor, oh, he's, you look at David, or you look at Moses, or you look at, but they were leading. But we can do it today still in just little things that would lead us away from God. And that's the example, is to always remember that it's God is first, and your pride and your arrogance to put that in check, especially for myself.
Yeah, and in such small ways sometimes. So that great personification. Thanks. Um, Anything else on this section? Jim?
Well, you mentioned that he wasn't like Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe he figured that having everybody come in and do this would, if he did it that way, that would take away. I mean, he was smart enough to realize that people are productive. And if you do stuff that interfere with their productivity, it only hurts you.
Okay, so yeah, it's more of a functional, like we want this kingdom to be working and not in there bowing down to some golden image. Excellent. And the fact that he didn't think of it, these other people had to come and think of it, of course, for nefarious purposes.
I'm gonna play a little bit of defend King Darius here for a second. Comparing him to King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar was not the first king of the Babylonian Empire. He was a great king of the Babylonian Empire, but he was not the first king. King Darius was the first king of the Medes. So he was taking over an old kingdom of the Mesopotamians. They changed powers from the Babylonians to the Medes. So he was the first king of this new nation, built upon the skeletons and skulls of the old empire, right? So he had to be a little bit more careful of what he did. Now, I would say he was not as prideful as King Nebuchadnezzar. Obviously he wasn't, because he had to be careful with what he did. Because for one, he had to set a good example. As the first king, Nebuchadnezzar didn't have to worry about that. He was just like, oh, look how great I am. Look how great my gods, lowercase, have made me. So to compare them to is not equivalent. So yes, King Darius was not as prideful as Nebuchadnezzar, but he still had some issues. We know that.
Yeah.
Because he was arrogant and he was ignorant of many things that happened.
Yeah, good point. The situation is very different in the empire. This is much more loosely connected. There's all sorts of issues. You've got the Medes. I think they were like this crazy tribe from the east that they had got into Richard has his hand up, that they had got into some kind of an agreement with, that they had him help come to Babylon. It's super complicated if you ever look at it. And he's kind of riding this and all, trying to take care of all this. It's not nearly as easy, like you said, as Nebuchadnezzar had it, because he was handed it on a platter.
Yeah, I don't know if I entirely agree with that, because he was handed to him and he was given it, but what he built on, but also what Darius did, he sacked Babylon without sieging it or anything. He diverted a river. I mean, pretty sharp. I mean, if you think about how he did it and the little amount of bloodshed, at least we read about taking the city the size of Babylon, the way he took it. So he was pretty intelligent, and he was, it wasn't like, to Amos's point, he was the first. He looked at that, and to take that city at the time, it was the seat of the known world.
Yeah, we talked about the size of the walls,
Yeah.
and all that.
I think Bob, or maybe somebody mentioned last week that you can take a chariot around the walls. I mean, it was a pretty impenetrable city, given the fact that that's probably why they're in there celebrating and drinking when they had to know that the needs were out there, and not really paying much attention to it, thinking that they were secure. But
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that we've got the walls, just like whenever Jerusalem was sacked, they're in there thinking, well, we're God's children, right? And God is their wall, right? And it didn't end up happening because he had left Jim and then Cindy.
You would have thought that when the river ran dry, they would have said, uh-oh.
Yeah, they couldn't get in because everyone was in.
And I agree with Aaron. I think that he was a really good politician. And he was really crafty at what he was doing. But it's hard to forget throughout the book of Daniel, God's hand is in everything. That, you know, a river is averted and then he takes it over, really? That is God doing that. God is the puppet master. He's making everything happen. So we can't give a whole lot of credit to Darius because God is still working through Darius, and he gives him an opportunity to repent and give him glory. Not so much for other ones, but for Nebuchadnezzar and for Darius, he gave that opportunity because they were teachable. Not all hard, and so he knows that. But he is working everything out to his plan for a purpose.
Yeah, and he rises, these guys up so again, that's one of our questions, right? So there's an answer. What is God doing here? Well, he's, moving these kingdoms, moving the world forward to Jesus coming. Emily.
Well, that's why he starts out with Daniel needing favor through that dream, where you have Babylon, then you have the Medes and the Persians, and then finally Rome at the end, that you have this king working his way through all of these different, even though his physical group of people, the Jews, are taken over, his spiritual people are who are going to endure until the end.
And he's taking care of them the whole time. And I think that partly explains Daniel's his keeping in power. It's because are the Jews as his people still there and need to be protected? Yes. And he needs to take them back to the promised land like he told them that he was going to. Wow.
And I know we're not quite there yet, but we're talking about Darius' personality. Granted, he didn't pay attention to a lot of his details. He did pay attention to the one person who was consistently correct about what he did in all aspects of his life and of his service. So God put in place someone who could humble himself, also had a contrite heart, and repented of what he did. We're going to get to it, but I just want to bring, since we're talking about his personality, he was somebody who had a heart that God would work with. And God put him in place so that when the time was right, he could intercede and make the correct decisions from a correct standpoint.
Yeah, like Cindy was saying, he's teachable, right? And his response, whenever they snap the trap shut and come to him, we'll get to that next week. What was his response? He's like, I can't believe I did that. All right, that was basically what his response was. We'll get to that. What I want to do is I wanted to, because we haven't talked about Daniel very much in this. We've talked about Darius a lot, which is great. And to move us on, though, what did Daniel do whenever this law came out? What was his response? What did he do? He goes home and he opens his windows up toward Jerusalem, and that day he prays to God publicly in front of everyone 3 times. That's Daniel's response. And basically that it wasn't anything new. That's what he had been doing, and he just kept doing it. So that says so much about Daniel's character right there. He's going to be consistent in the face of possible death. Tony, that he did this.
Yeah, Daniel, he didn't let anybody betray his faith and his belief in God. This God is going to be there no matter what, and that's why he opened his window and said, "Look, you see what I'm doing? I'm not going to change because of any decrees and laws." so, you know, that's what's gonna lead up to him going in the lion's den, but, yeah, he didn't bow down for that at all.
He was strong. And let's just look at the last verse there before we finish off, and then that'll set up the account in the throne room next week. So Daniel knew that the writing was signed. He went home, he went to his upper room, and his windows opened towards Jerusalem. He knelt down on his knees 3 times that day. So whatever those times were, and he prayed and gave thanks before God, as was his custom since his early days. The consistency of Daniel, right? And so then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. So that to me, it sounds like on that third prayer in the evening, whenever it was, they show up at the house. I don't know if they didn't think, if he was going to do it in the morning, whatever. They showed up and they found Daniel doing it. They caught him in the act. And then we'll see next week what happens when they take him and how everything plays out from that. Thank you so much for your inputs.
Yes, sir.
Looking back.
Morning, how are you? You warmed up all of a sudden, didn't
Hey, how are you? I don't know. Feeling okay? Nope.
Exactly.